This is Age of Treason Radio. With your host, Tan Stoffel. The Jew Menace. The big news this week is that the Jews have very openly and collectively, as Jews, called upon governments everywhere, but especially in Europe, to provide them special treatment, to protect and serve the Jews specifically by suppressing and punishing any expression of whatever the Jews decide to define as anti-Semitism. Effectively, the Jews and their worshippers are calling for a ban on blasphemy against the Jews. They're seeking to criminalize any expression of irreverence, disrespect, distaste, disagreement, or even mere disregard for the complaints and demands that Jews are constantly making. Complaints and demands such as the ones they're making this week, which we're going to critique in some detail. This will be precisely the sort of critique that the kind of bans that they're demanding would make illegal everywhere. Let's start by noting that there are two very specific kinds of blasphemy that the Jews are most keen to stop. The first they call Holocaust denial, by which they mean any form of challenge to or rejection of their version of history, their narrative about the period of European history which used to be known as World War II. The second kind of blasphemy that they want governments to stop is any and all forms of criticism of their ethno-state, Israel. This is actually old news, in that the Jews have been making these same complaints and demands for decades, especially since the war ended. It is a difficult fact for white people to face, even 70 years after the war. Most still will not think about it in these terms. But the white race, all European peoples, whatever their nationality and wherever they may live today, lost that war. The Jews won. There is no clearer indication of this than the unrivaled position of power from which the Jews have been able to dictate to whites everywhere what we can and can't say about Jews or virtually anything that Jews feel impinges on their interests, most especially having to do with that war. Thus, it's less and less even referred to as World War II, and more it's called the Holocaust or Shoah, because that's how Jews see it. And as everyone can see now, it's only because the Jews' media and political power compels it to be that way. The war was all about the Jews. The most elementary point to make this time is that these three things, the Jews, Israel, and their Holocaust narrative, are connected. They come in a package. And it is this way because the Jews themselves insist on it. Yet they also insist that if anyone else makes this connection, it is anti-Semitism. As I mentioned the last time when describing Jew worship and blasphemy and how Jews define the meanings of these words, the double standards that Jews promote seem surreal, almost magical in their effect. But I think it's really just a reflection of their dominance. Speaking of dominance and old news, I'm recording this the night before, but tomorrow is a special day for Jews and Jew worshippers. When this special day was first declared by the UN in 2005, Robert Foroson wrote a short article about it that he titled, "The UN Decides a Universal Ban on Revisionism." I'd like to read a bit of what he wrote. On November 1st, unanimously and without a vote, the representatives of the 191 nations making up the UN adopted, or let be adopted, An Israeli drafted resolution proclaiming January 27th, quote, International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, unquote. Moreover, the resolution rejects any denial of the Holocaust as an historical event, either in full or in part. Khorasan's conclusion: this extraordinary UN resolution also constitutes proof that historical revisionism is a reality that can no longer be bypassed, denied, or played down. Its notoriety has become global. Still, let us take care to recognize that the revisionist researchers who remain active are now but a handful, and with each passing year, their future grows darker. Well, here we are in that dark future, and the Jews are still at it. I think Khorasan was trying to be optimistic. But the Jews today are more aggressive and pushing still for more banning, and more directly connecting it to themselves and their Holocaust narrative and to their ethno-state. It's not just about the Holocaust or revisionism, what's going on this week. But let's take a closer look at a few Jews media reports on the menace that Jews have been making of themselves this week. The first is titled, Prozor Calls on European Leaders, Take a Stand Against Anti-Semitism. This was an article in Ynet News, that is Jews media that's aimed at Jews themselves rather than at their worshippers. And Prozor is the Israeli ambassador to the UN. And so this is about the speech that he delivered to the UN at the beginning of their meeting about anti-Semitism. Let the message echo from the halls of the UN to the streets of Europe, to the capital of every nation. Stand for human rights and human dignity by taking a stand against anti-Semitism, Prozor said. This rhetorical fraud, Jews cloaking their concern for their own particularist interests in disingenuous universalist language, is found throughout their pronouncements this week and all the weeks before as well. It's a constant in what they do and how they do it. But to see just how brazen and transparent this statement is, you simply have to substitute one word. Let the message echo from the halls of the UN to the streets of Europe, to the capital of every nation. Stand for human rights and human dignity by taking a stand against anti-Europeanism. Is there even one European politician in power who would claim he himself is taking a stand against anti-Europeanism? Much less one that would lecture the rest of the world that they should do it, that they must do it. The Ynet article continues, Prozor asserted that, quote, the struggle against anti-Semitism must be a priority for every nation because the hatred that begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. History has shown us time and again that when a nation's Jews are not safe, the entire society is at risk. This is a Jew telling us what history means. The main struggle of the Jews has always been to ensure that the harm the Jews cause others is never attributed to its source, to the Jews. And to do this, the Jews shift the blame elsewhere. In this case, as usual, to some vague anti-Semitism. The argument that Prozor is making here is that everybody else must make it their priority to stop somebody else from even complaining about what the Jews do. And all the Jews have to do is tell other people what to do. History has shown us time and again that the Jews are parasites who infiltrate, manipulate, and ruthlessly exploit other nations, that they have cared only for their own interests, as they have undermined and ultimately brought to ruin and fled every other nation they have ever lived amongst. History has shown us time and again that Jews pose a special menace to hosts who attempt to look after their own safety and defend themselves against the depredations of the Jews. Even those who succeed in reclaiming control over their nation, as the National Socialists did in Germany, find that the Jews never forgive and never forget. In Germany's case, World Jewry declared war in 1933, and they immediately began agitating for the governments of Britain and France and the Soviet Union and the United States to wage war on Germany, to teach them the lesson that Prozor alludes to here cryptically, that when a nation's Jews are not safe, the entire society is at risk of being bombed by other nations that the Jews will inspire to do the bombing. The Jews blame their hosts for resisting them, that they bribe and lobby and propagandize and even succeed in taking control of the host's leaders and crucial organs makes them more culpable, and the harm that they cause more insidious, not less. The article continues, quoting Prozor, "Europe is being tested," he said. "We don't need any more monuments commemorating the Jews who were murdered in Europe. We need a strong and enduring commitment to the living Jews in Europe. If the governments of Europe succeed in defending their Jewish communities, then they will succeed in defending liberty and democracy." Prozor cites the Jewish victim narrative here, their Holocaust narrative, even as he's denying it. What the Jews actually want and get is both worship and defense. They get the monuments and the holidays commemorating them, and they get special security. And it's all sponsored by governments and funded by the taxes paid by others. It's Jews telling Europeans what to think and what to do, literally defining liberty and democracy and even success as the defense of Jews. Continuing again with the article, Prozor vowed that, quote, "The days when Jews were the world's victims are over. We will never again be helpless, and we will never again remain silent. Today we have the state of Israel standing guard." There's that victimhood again that he's referring to, and this time it's couched in menace. What he's saying here is we don't need to incite others to war against you anymore. We have weapons of our own now. The article explicitly mentions the attack on the kosher supermarket in Paris a few weeks ago, and it gives the impression that what's happening this week was triggered by what happened several weeks ago. It isn't. The bombing of Gaza this summer was not explicitly mentioned in the article, though that was the actual impetus for the UN meeting, and that's hinted at indirectly in this paragraph toward the end of the article. The meeting was requested by 37 countries who sent a letter to Assembly President Sam Kutesa on October 1st, calling for a meeting in response to, quote, "an alarming outbreak of anti-Semitism worldwide," unquote. They said they wanted a meeting because, quote, "a clear message from the General Assembly is a critical component of combating the sudden rise of violence and hatred directed at Jews," unquote. This simple statement, in both what it says and what it doesn't say, reflects the incredible power and influence that Jews have over dozens of other governments outside the single government that they officially control in Israel. Jews have enough control over the governments of 37 other countries, and most crucially the U.S., to manipulate them in this fashion.